Come on in. Come on in, Randy. Yep. Close the door of the ark. Come on in. I know, I saw you put it in there. Oh, geez. I know what I can get to talk about now. All right, everyone. Welcome to the last half of the Way of Christ and His Apostles conference. We have to give a welcome to those that are online. There is, at this particular conference, there was a lot of people that were unable to get visas. And so there is quite a few that are either online or are watching this after it's being recorded. So all these are live broadcasts, and then they're also recorded so you can, so people will be watching these later. So we greet all of them as well. But we are talking in this session about paradigm curves for gospel progress is what we're going to be talking about. And how this will proceed is Jeff and I will introduce the topic. We will talk up here amongst the two of us. Those of you that were here on our Sunday morning equipping time of our leaders, you've seen the intentionality that we have around dialogue. Dialogue is key in this paradigm. And so we'll dialogue about this particular item. One of us will step down and give a teaching via some slides, and then we'll get back here and we'll talk about it amongst ourselves to clear up some things, debate some things, and if we have time, we at certain times will hand the microphone out and let you ask questions or make comments about what you yourself, what your church is wrestling with that's related to what we're talking about. That is the expectation of what's going to happen. So, is everyone ready? Are you ready? No, but are you ready? Yeah, please go. Yes, all right. I don't know. Jeff, I felt compelled to get them motivated. This is right after lunch. So people's stomachs may be...
That's probably...
Thanks, Jade. Jade, aren't you supposed to be at college today? All right. Way to go. Way to prioritize your life. You must not be on.
I'm not on, am I? Okay. Yeah, it's probably good. I forgot about just being lunch now. It's probably good that you're giving your paper first and not mine. That way, if they miss something because they're tired from lunch, it doesn't matter as much.
See how this is going to go? This is going to be a fun time, isn't it?
But I just noticed they gave you the good ear thing. You got your little thing on the end. Look, I just got a wire on the end of mine.
That's because your beard. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So, Jeff, let's talk about what we're going to talk about in this session. This session is about paradigm curves for gospel progress. We handed out a paper, but I think we should tell a little bit of orientate people here to. I met with you. You met with me.
You're going to go to the plane, right?
I'm going to go to the plane.
That's just what I was going to do.
Okay, you'd bring him to the
All
plane.
right. So I get off the airplane. I've been overseas or something, you know. And so I had Nancy picks me up, and I asked Michael and Leah if they could meet me, you know, right near the airport, and we could eat because I had some stuff I wanted to share. And basically it was...
When was this?
Oh,
A while ago.
Yeah.
Good enough. More than 10 years.
And basically, I'm recruiting him.
More than 10 years, 15
You know,
years.
I mean, we've been together for quite a while by then, but I was recruiting him in a way because I was so excited about it, but I was particularly excited about the significance of 3 paradigm curves, that they come in threes, and how that matched how things were unfolding. And I thought that would be highly motivational to you.
And the key operative word there is thought. Okay? Thought, that would be motivational.
And so what was your response to encountering 3 paradigm curves?
I was not motivational. I was not motivated. I remember seeing those, and I remember where we were sitting. That restaurant's not there anymore. But I just remember thinking, I don't know where to put this. I don't know where to put these curves, and I don't know why are these curves important? I had no framework of where to put these curves. Yeah, it sounds like from a progress and from a perspective of improvements and macro changes that happen in our world, this sounds really, really good. Really, really valuable in that sense. But as far as Christianity is concerned, I couldn't place it. I couldn't figure out what to do with it. And so in that sense, it wasn't motivational because I couldn't find value in them. I couldn't place them. I think that would be how I would summarize it.
And see, when I share something and I'm excited and I've got vision to it, I can tell if it's going like this, with the person, because my map is impact. I want it to have impact, and all I got was starry eyes. But guess who's doing the paper on paradigm curves today?
Yeah, and that's the thing. As time has moved on, since that time, in the last, let's say, 15 years, since that's happened, what you begin to do is you see what's happening in India. You see what's happening in Mongolia. You see what's happening in the large country around that. You see what's happening in Europe. You see what's happening in the Middle East, North African countries. You see what's happening in the Central East African countries. You see what's happening in all the south. You see what's happening in Latin America, and you begin. There's patterns that begin to be common threads through all of them. And there's common threads, and then all of a sudden, you have all these little threads that you're recognizing and seeing. And then I remember we were at a particular event that we can't talk about publicly with all of you, but we were together at a meeting with a very strategic, important leader, and we started with these curves, and for me individually, it just all of a sudden I knew.
Well, you're talking about South Korea.
Right.
Yeah.
The place we weren't going to talk about. That's the place. When I said don't talk about it, that was the
Well, they don't know who we were with in South Korea, so South Korea is safe.
They're one step closer to the truth now. But nevertheless, all of a sudden the curves give you a framework. They give you a framework for what's happened, and they give you a framework for really the battles for some of the comments, some of the battles that are going to happen in the days ahead. Because some of you this week, in the last 5 days, I hear comments that are made, or I see comments that are made, and I can see by your words, your body language, your response, your communication, that it's not, that's way different. I made a few comments about elders and why it's silly to have rotating elders when the scripture talks about fathers and mothers have to shepherd their people through their whole lives. And some of you are just like, oh boy. But my point is is that can be mapped on the paradigm curve. You're not on that part of the curve yet. You need to be in order to follow the biblical traditions that were laid out for us. But that's where the paradigm curves are so helpful, because they not only show the past, but they give you the battles you need to fight in the future in order to remain faithful.
I'm just adding stuff up for the first time, though, because, it was probably 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. Maybe it was longer, but so I'm all excited about these curves that you're all going to be excited about. I'm excited about these curves, and where are you going to put them? And so then last year, roughly at this time in South Korea, he gets all excited about the curves. So it must have taken you close to a decade to get excited about those curves and fully understand them. I'm just adding. I mean, it just seems like no, actually, we've had a lot of discussions about those through the years, so I'm joking about that. But it is true that the lights really went on.
Nobody laughed at you, so it wasn't
the lights
funny.
really went on a year ago, and now he's got those curves and everything.
I do, because they do what I just said. They give you a macro framework. They give you a macro framework for what's happening in Christendom. The reality is Christendom is going down. The impact of Christendom, and let's not unpack everything we mean by that right now, Jeff. But what was it in that James Shea book? One of the first quotes is by Pope John Paul, one of the popes, and he said, Christendom is dead. Christendom is over. Because the impact of Christendom is not there anymore. And what we mean by that, in a sense, is the patterns of Christianity. The impact is and so paradigms curves are showing us how the battles we need to fight to get back to an impactful Christianity.
That book is a small readable book you should get, by the way, From Christendom to Apostolic Age.
Christendom to Apostolic Age. It's a
Very
outstanding
important
book. And you know what the picture on the cover is? Is the first Christians in Kyiv. First Christians in Kyiv, yeah. Where's Anton?
Really?
It's the first Christians in Kyiv.
Huh.
And he pointed that out to me when he was over doing a podcast interview with me about Ukraine. The picture on the book is the first Christians in Kyiv.
See, as soon as you said Kyiv, he woke up.
Oh. The other thing, though, Jeff, and I'll talk about this in just a moment. I'll get started in just a moment. But how, when paradigms, as they wane, as their value decreases over time, they splinter into these unique specialities. That's what Thomas Kuhn talks about in some of his last writings, and I'll mention some of that. But what was so impactful about that is you can see that in Western Christianity. You can see how they've splintered into all different specialities, and thus what you've heard from Jeff and Bill and the whole team for the last 40, 50 years is everything has got to be back integrated. You can't have theological schools that are not involved in what the church is doing. You can't have parachurch organizations that are involved in missions that are not involved with what the church is doing. You got all these unique specialities, and that's what happens with a system as it degrades. It splinters into these unique specialities, and that's predictable.
By the way, we'll explain it to you, but we're packaging a lot of our stuff today in the context of an emerging Christendom. And you got to realize that Christendom is used two ways. One way is it's Western Christianity that's been institutionalized and really has developed ever since after the first 300 years. But the other way that Christendom is used is just all of the Christians in the world. And so the new paradigms that are coming, you were talking about on both Hans Kuhn and Thomas Kuhn, are going to produce a whole new Christendom. In other words, the paradigms always drive all of Christianity, and so the Western one is waning Christendom, institutional, but a new one is emerging, and that new one that is emerging, I believe, is not just a paradigm, but will shake the next Christendom in the terms of all believers. So that I just threw that in so I didn't have to have 5 conversations after this time and why we can use Christendom this way too.
Yeah, yeah. It's a really helpful book. That book is really helpful to unpack some of that. Okay, let me. You should have the paper in front of you. I'm going to step down and talk about it now.
Can somebody, one of you guys in the back, can you grab me a paper? I didn't.
And thank you, Nathan.
I'm
the Hala
being
family.
onslaughted by Halas, mom and son.
That's his mom. I forgot what I was going to say. I'm going to step down and talk about this, and then we will get back together. So let me screen share with you. Okay. Oh, I remember what I was going to say now. I'm not going to go through the whole paper. I'm just going to take you on an overview of the paper. You have the paper. You have it in the 8.5 by 11 form intentionally. We're going to keep it in that form for a year or two as we work with it. It is not a final product. We're going to work with it. Some of the charts in there are first drafts of things, and so this is a paper we're going to be working with. It's a first draft in a sense. It's in many ways it's been through a lot of iterations already, but globally it's a first draft. So I'm just going to be taking you through some of the highlights here. You're going to start seeing over the years a new series of papers called Global Dialogue Papers, and these are papers that I'll be writing around these topics. We're going to talk about 2 of them in the next 2.5 days that I'll be presenting. But these are all papers that are on these curves. The reason we're starting with these curves is because they provide the overall framework for the paradigm that all of us are called to be part of in some way or another. So what we want to do is explain the main curves, providing confidence and giving clarity to the historical work while showing the path for the future work. And the result of this is that you have a confidence that we're in a period of time, none of us got to choose when we were born or who we were born to. Nobody got to choose that. But for whatever reason, all of us are born at a particular time and place, and for some reason brought into these ideas where one set of patterns of the way Christianity is done, its impact is declining, and another one is emerging. And we want to shape that, get that back to the way of Christ and his apostles, and shape the next paradigm of Christianity, of Christendom, towards the way of Christ and his apostles. And then the other thing you keep hearing out of Jeff and I is that we really want to push forward that we have a collective stewardship and responsibility. It's not just about your church, it's not just about your church network, and it's not just about your civilization that you're in. There's a collective component to this as Christ's global church. Here's how the paper's laid out, why S-curves are helpful for understanding paradigm work, how paradigms scale in the world, the incommensurability of old and new paradigms. I'll briefly talk about that, and then just a little bit about the future. I'm going to go really fast from here on, but again, because you have the paper. And my really only intention here is just to light a little bit of a flame of intelligence underneath you to get you to understand this. Now, we have to start with some basic things. Major revolutions in science advancement were not linear progressions. They didn't just build on top of each other, on top of each other, on top of each other. There was that. But the whole idea of paradigms is there comes a moment in time when there's a whole set of problems that can't be solved. Or something is happening in the world, and all of a sudden, there's a major revolution, and it is approached from an entirely different vantage point, and it pushes everything back to zero, and everything has to be rethought. And so that's introduced as a paradigm. Those periods of revolutions are summarized as times of paradigm change, and that's the time we live in now. But to get your heads into the basics of what a paradigm is, we use that word a lot. It's a set of patterns that most people in the world, it's subconscious to them. They have no idea they operate with a paradigm. Most people don't even think about it. That book we were referring to talks about that. They call it a RIV, or something imaginative vision. Most people never think about it. So if you even think about paradigms, you have a special stewardship in this world, because most people don't. If I ask Tom, pick up the phone, what motion do you make? Whoa, all right. Tom went like this. Elliot, pick up the phone. No. Yeah, pick up your phone. James, pick up the phone. Oh, everybody's doing it. You guys aren't supposed to do it. I thought you would go like this. My point is, who wants to, Samuel, pick up your phone? Okay, good. You're the only one that answered right. You don't have your phone here. That's good. I'm glad you're not on your phone. The point is most people of your generation and of my generation, they pick up a phone like this, and they put it up to their ear. That generation, they don't pick up the phone. They don't. How many times a day do you talk on the phone compared to texting? 0. You don't talk on the phone. That's a paradigm. When you think of phone, Tom thinks of putting something up to his ear like this that has a cord attached to it, and he has to physically dial the numbers, and he hears the beeps, or even a rotary phone. That's a smaller set of paradigms, but take that to the church. What if I'm going to have you draw a picture of the church? What are you going to draw? What are most people? You're sitting by a guy in the airplane. What's he going to draw? He's going to make a building with a steeple on it, and he might have a pastor there with a whole bunch of people sitting in pews. Yeah, that's a paradigm. That's a set of patterns that everyone believes to be true, and so they do it that way. That's a paradigm. We asked a girl in our church to draw the church, Iva. How old is Iva? 10 years old. It's Randy's granddaughter, and this is what she drew. She don't draw a picture of a steeple. That's a paradigm. Okay? So, paradigms are disruptive. Most of them are sudden in the sense of most people feel the effects of them to be sudden. They're actually not that sudden as they unfold, but they're sudden in that sense. They're far-reaching effects. They're global. They're inevitable. They're invisible to most people. Since the 1970s, and this is actually a piece of the chart that Jeff showed me at that restaurant he was talking about. These are the 3 paradigms curves that he was so excited about that I said, boy, I don't know what to do with these. I don't know where to place them. So that's the actual chart right there. Now, I'm not going to go through this chart. I'm going to actually move on to my second point. And you can read about these. What these charts are is it's those previous charts, but it has the macro and a few of the minor. If you look at these spots right here, let me pull this up. Oops. Let me pull this up. Like right here this is a macro part of paradigm changes that has had a problem that was solved, something that was done. These are all macro parts. And you could go through, and at some point in my life, I want to go through and I actually want to map a whole bunch of the macro ones, the minor ones, and the micro ones. And you can even get more. But for this paper, all I've done is just put most of the macro ones and a few of the minor ones on, like right here. And so this is what the topos argument means. It's the overall argument for that whole curve. And then this is the title of them. So I'll get more into this as we move along, and you can read the rest of it in the paper. But that's the first The church needs to get back to its theological education of taking responsibility to mature all people in life, no matter their station, and present them mature before Christ. And they have to do everything in their power to present them mature before Christ. I know Ray loves to say, what's your discipleship plan? And most churches say, preach on Sunday mornings, Sunday school, and that's it. That's all the plan that they have. Even though, and so I could go on and on about that. Denominations are what have taken place of the middle one, and funding has been done mainly for tragedy and relief is mainly seen as the government's job and seen as someone else's work. It's not seen as a central job of the church. Let's talk. The other thing I'm going to bring you to in this paper is how do paradigms scale in the world? How do paradigms actually scale? Well, there's a really good book on this called The Sociology of Philosophies. If the title, nobody wants to read it. But it's the study of the social effects of how philosophies actually move across time. And so it's a research piece that does that. And the first 100 and some pages are just critical for us as Christians, absolutely critical to know what's the sociological meaning, what is the human interactions that actually happen in order for paradigms to actually scale and sustain in the world. It says these individuals there's 2 points here. The community is really important, and the individuals that are in the beginning of those paradigms are critically important, absolutely critical. Because in the beginning, there's long before it's a reality, those people believe in it. And so they talk as if it's done, but it's not even hardly, it's just started. But they talk as if it's done. And it's the individual who carries the initial paradigms together, paradigm aspects together, holding the loose ends of it all together. And it's after many dialogues in a community that key leader's body of work and his group of mentors and other people, and then the followers begin to lead a global dialogue. At that point, a new paradigm begins to emerge out of the soil. So when you read that, you reflect on at least our last 50 years, I've not been alive 50 years, but the collective we for 50 years, you begin to see that what he's talking about in that book is us. And it gives you an extreme amount of confidence. This is not a Christian man. This is a man who just says, this is how philosophies in the world move. He said, and this is all from his book, and I give you a couple different quotes in there, which are, this guy's writing is tough. It's a tough stake, but the value of his words is just absolutely incredible. He says, there's many people in communities who have ideas. A lot of people have ideas. A lot of people love to talk about ideas, but it's very few who actually write down things in ways for other people to understand. Very rare in our world of humans when you study it. But he says it's even more rare that there's a set of people who actually write across decades of time and they carry on the same paradigmatic conversation. It rarely happens. It rarely happens. So there again, when you're reading this, you're thinking, oh my goodness, we got to pay attention. Because we're accused a lot of why is in these first 40 years, why is Jeff the main author of everything? Are we trying to build a Jeff club here? What's going on? When you start reading outside sources like this that say these things, you begin to understand how paradigms move in the world, and it begins to give you a confidence on what God is doing. These sustained and intentional dialogues, he talks about Plato. Plato wrote things down. Socrates never did. He took the hemlock. He died. Plato wrote everything down, but we talk about Socrates, right? But Socrates didn't write anything. It was Plato who did. But in a community combined with propensity to write things down for others to follow creates a successive dialogues for more people to be learners of those ideas. This is what allows the paradigm to move across generations. So what happens is Kulo and Matthews can have similar dialogues in their own situations based off tools, and as they have those dialogues, those successive dialogues, they too begin to build deep roots. And it's pockets here, it's pockets here, it's pockets here, it's pockets there, it's pockets here, and then together the paradigm begins to emerge. That's what this author is saying. Really quick on these curves, you have innovators and early adopters that are in the beginning, and innovators have the ability to understand complex knowledge. They're willing to accept setbacks, on, and they can cope with a high degree of uncertainty, daring, and they're risky and they're rash. That is about 2% of people when things are, and some of you in here are that, and the rest of you are not. And you say, well, can you give me an agenda of your time? Michael, why don't you get, if that's the first thing in your head is, how come you didn't start on time and what's the agenda, then you're probably an early majority, late majority, or a laggard. That doesn't mean you're bad or good. It just means that's how God's wired you. We need those things. But this is a science actually from hybrid seed corn about how people adopt it. And so early adopters, they're an integrated part of the local social system. They give advice, information to others about innovators, and they're respected by their peers. So historically for us around the world, those are typically the main two categories of people that we've worked with, is those two people. Not always, but those are the other thing, chart I show you in here is about critical mass. Most people think that in order to get scale in the world, in order to get numbers, or if any of you that have ever been in the business world, you realize in order to actually have a critical mass or it's not as far up the curve adoption as you might think. It's actually towards the bottom third. It's at the top of the first third of time in numbers because you have enough that's actually rooted and actually to get to this critical mass. What is it that like when you think about exponential growth, they talk about how 1% is actually halfway when you think in exponential numbers. And that's what the church is. The church has potential to be exponentially. I was going to put that in the paper because it's a mathematical, if you look at it, if you're trying to get to a certain number, if you want to get there, to get halfway there, and you start with a number 1, and you want to get to 1,000,000, 1% of the total number, 1% is halfway there to the whole number when you use exponential math. So that's what critical mass is talking about. In summary for this portion, paradigms scale via their leadership who are actually based in a community, and that community has to sustain those conversations. And that's why we talk to our local church network. That's why we have to be based in a network of churches, Ebby, for example. We have to be based because they actually help sustain the conversation. It's not an individual. You begin to learn that it's not about an individual over many years and generations. The people who adopt the new paradigm begin with those who are able to cope with high degree of uncertainty and are willing to accept ongoing setbacks. As the paradigm grows and matures, more early adopters accept it, and it's at this point that critical mass could be getting close. When the early adopters come on the scene, it's those that want to look at the iPhone and just look at it and then it just unlocks. That's an early adopter versus people who would wait in line for an iPhone that worked. The phone part would not work very well. The speaker was terrible and the plug was horrible. Those are the first people on the scene that would buy that stuff. Let's talk about this one. This is the third part. How many of you have heard of the term incommensurability? That's a terrible question. How many of you want to hear the term incommensurability? Same amount of hands should rise up. Not very many of you really care about that word, but here's why it's important for us. As we stand at the beginning of a new era, introducing a new world back to Christ and His Apostles' paradigm, we need to understand the interactions that take place between an old paradigm and patterns of Christianity and a new. There's interactions that take place, and in many ways, what I'm going to try to do in short order here is show you how those two systems are incommensurate. And what I mean by that, I'll unpack that, but it means they cannot adequately be compared. In the paper I talk about in the very introduction, I say often what you'll do is you'll look at this, or it might be in the next paper, but you'll try to look at the ideas in here, and you'll try to take the ideas and you'll try to put it into what you already know. You'll try to take that piece of the puzzle and you'll put it into your Sunday morning. And you can't, and it's the same thing I was doing with these S-curves with Jeff. I was trying to put it into what I already knew, and I couldn't do it. And so I deemed it worthless. Kick it out. I don't need it. But that's what incommensurability helps you with to understand is they actually aren't comparable. They are comparable in certain aspects, but they're not comparable on the whole. This was written by a guy, Thomas Kuhn. He's the guy who came up with the word paradigm in the whole structure of scientific revolutions in the 1950s. Was it 50s or 60s? 60s. I think it was the 60s. And these are his last writings. And they just came out, Jeff, what, a year ago? Something like that? And he's been, and these are written by some of his students. He's been gone for a while, but these were collected by his students, and boy, these were just powerful for us as Christians. In the final analysis, the old paradigm and new paradigm are incommensurate. The perspective of their respective champions are so different that one might say they're responding to completely different realities. One is playing chess, the other is playing checkers, and they're on the same board. They're incommensurate. And so those of you that are always trying to mix stuff, you'll slowly through your life, you'll realize you can't do it and be faithful to both. The other thing, I mentioned this earlier, is that when paradigms, he no longer spoke about how revolutions in which a new paradigm replaces the old one, but rather saw them actually as time periods where the old ones, as they begin to wane and their impact begins to fade, the old ones begin to splinter into unique specialities. And you can see this. It is so clear in Christendom, as you step back and look at the whole of it, you can see this very, very clearly about what's happened. I talk about event churches there. Let me just show you here on this first curve, equipping and training leaders has been relegated to seminaries and Bible schools. It's been splintered from its original purpose, and it's a sacred speciality. It's splintered into its own unique speciality that only can be done by someone who has credentials. And furthermore, now you're put into a church and you have to have credentials. And furthermore, you can't do anything in the church unless I have credentials. It's become a sacred thing. It's its own thing. Sometimes where most Bible colleges and universities are completely disconnected from churches completely. They have nothing to do with them. All they do is they teach in the school. They have nothing to do with the church. And the church has nothing to do, oh, you want more training? You need to go to a school. And so it goes both ways. And that's the outcome of why that first curve needs to, in this new paradigm, we got to get back to the Paul Timothy way of taking responsibility for training all of our people. What was once the acquiring of wisdom through apprenticeships has been replaced by acquiring academic degrees via an institutional structure. You're going to sit in a classroom for 4 years and receive it. Missions, you can do the same thing on missions here. I'll let you read that on your own. I'm going long enough, and I'll let you read this one on your own as well. There's a lot more in the paper on it that will help you understand how his words about incommensurability actually show you how it's been split into its own specialities in Christendom. Okay. One other comment here about incommensurability. He talks about in incommensurability, defining it, that it takes the old paradigm, uses a set of language, uses a lexical language, uses a lexicon, uses a set of terms. And if you're going to do a new paradigm, a different paradigm, you actually have to use a different lexicon. You have to use different terms. And so you can actually define what they actually mean according to the set of patterns that you're pursuing. So again, if you're thinking, well, why do you use such different terms? Why can't you just say gospel? Why do you have to use the term kerygma? Why do you do that? Why do you make it so hard? Why don't you use doctrine? Why do you have to use the word didache? Because what we mean by the Didache is not what the last 500 years of doctrine means. And again, this author from a completely different place is giving the social aspects of why that has to be the case. So it's a confidence building thing. Incommensurability between rival paradigms does not imply total incomparability or the impossibility of communication. What is lacking is not comparability, but actually a unit of length in terms of which both can be measured directly and exactly. It's not possible. They're incommensurate. To apply the term, then he talks about math there a little bit. Kuhn's incommensurability thesis does not imply that there can be no understanding or translation between rival paradigms, only that understanding is always partial and translation is always imperfect. I hear a lot of people that say to me, well, can't we just all get along? I mean, we're all serving Jesus. Why can't we all just get along? And what you see in this guy's writing is that it's not about, in paradigms, you're not fighting with people per se. You're not fighting with people. What you're doing is you're fighting against a set of patterns that determines how we view the world. And so in that sense, it is a battle. He talks about how it's a battle. It has to be a battle. It's the only way to have a new paradigm emerge, is it has to be a battle. Okay, I think, Jeff, that's all I'm going to say. As I walk up into here, I'll tell you in the back, there is questions. And in these papers, I've ordered the questions intentionally. There is the first set of questions, and you'll see this in the other paper as well. But the first set of questions is to seek to understand what is being said. So the three questions under that first one is just, what is being said? Can you understand what's being said? So it's a recall, remembering. It's what most universities do on tests. It's the first level, is just remembering and recall. The second one, then move towards applying these patterns into our life. And then the third one is finish by creating new goals and incorporating new habits into our lives. So that's the order of the questions from an educational standpoint to try to get your people to understand what's being said. This is a, no, I've talked enough. So.
Good job.
What do you think? What's going through your mind? Oh, no, you don't need to clap.
Well, how many times have we had discussions? There were several things that clicked. And that's one thing that's important if you learn how to use the resources right. You should never teach any given resource, even if it's the 10th time you've taught it, and not learn something new. Otherwise, you're not engaged. There's just. But I got to thinking, I never picked up quite as strongly. Go to the slide not too far back where it breaks into pieces.
Oh, splinters into unique specialities.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't pick that up. But that's you're going to hear. It's really going to be fun. I think is Kaiser tomorrow morning his interview, or is it?
Walter Kaiser tomorrow morning at 9:00. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
We did an interview of Dr. Kaiser, Walter Kaiser, taught an Old Testament theology that was a mentor to me for about 30 years, and he's 90. And there's a Chinese theologian, well known, who did the interview of both of us, and we thought he was going to come here, but he just couldn't travel. But I reflected back. If you remember, there's a chart in that appendix to our large grand strategy. One whole conference was devoted to it on theology and culture. And in there is a chart before my charts that Kaiser, when he diagrammed he diagrammed what Farley had called a theological encyclopedia. And that answers what should a minister study and what order ought he to study it in. And the idea is that the seminary has the seminary disciplines have become so fragmented. We talk about 33,000 denominations. Well, there's the buffet is just endless when you're walking through the catalogs and trying to determine, what courses you're going to take, and you can't see the whole, and the whole process is fragmented. But I was just reflecting that's such a good way. We need to get a clear quote on that one. It effectively, this is a quote, right? Mm-hmm. Effectively, or is those just your words?
Yeah, those are my words. I took out, the quotes are in the paper. There is a quote in there.
That pretty much does effectively splinters.
Yeah,
anyway,
but the problem with it is it's so much longer in the writings. You have to summarize it down.
But I remember that I had a conversation with Kaiser, and that chart was 1976. And so right on his desk, he diagrams this thing out. You go from exegetical to biblical studies to ethical on over to checking it with historical theology. Remember that thing? And when I was sitting there at his desk, I would have been 24, it completely shifted my thinking, completely turned everything I was building for a few years before that in an apprenticeship curriculum upside down. I could instantly see this is totally different and totally the way we need to go. But what he was doing is he was looking at using Farley's book, but he was looking at 200 Farley to 400 years, if he goes all the way back, of theological education unfolding, and says essentially everything's fragmented. The effect is gone, the specialties, as a result. So that's just going to be I'm going to find that
It's
quote.
powerful.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
Because because you can look at the world and you can make sense of why we have what we have today. You can see why we have what we have today in Christianity, and so it should just make you, in a healthy way, it should make you dissatisfied and want to be being part of a solution. It doesn't mean, what I just gave to you was I recognize there are a lot of pieces in there that can be hard hitting, but what it should do, in a sense, is just give you enough discomfort that you want to be part of a solution, be part of a new set of patterns in your lifetime.
If you go back to, also, I liked how you drew on Collins. Randall Collins wrote the book, The Sociology of Philosophies. He originally was known for writing the Credential Society. If you remember, I've used that in the past, and that's how we came up with the portfolio system. Was out of the fact that we've got an academic system that, that fragments. But using the terms, the fact that we need a new lexicon.
Oh, that's Kuhn. Yeah,
that's really key, because there is logic, very important logic, behind having not an infinite amount of new words, but you can't take words in an old paradigm and dump and use that same word and dump something new in, and then talk with the 80% of the people that are in the other paradigm and think that you're communicating what the ideas are. There's no choice but to do a new vocabulary.
Yeah. Lexical structures is a language, words and phrases that are defined according to a new paradigm. And then the practices are what it looks like to apply that paradigm in the world.
And one other point that stood out again, too, was just this issue of authorship. We're under attack right now in we can't say what, but, just at a very large scale in a very large country, and we've got the Reformed theologians coming after this stuff like crazy, right at a time that it's reaching that, what's that word you use? Inflection
critical
point.
Mass is what this critical
point.
Mass is what this author calls it, but it's really inflection point is another word for it. It's where your movement, it looks like this, the numbers look like this. My hand is going upwards, can't see it, but then all of a sudden you hit a curve and you start going like this. Some people call it a hockey stick, right at the curve of the hockey stick. We don't play hockey here, so we don't know what that means, but
to expand just
inflection point is
to expand just a little bit on Collins' work. If you were to Michael put a few of the principles out front there, but if you were, and I'm going to do a little bit of this in my paper too, that on Friday morning, but this idea that it's so cool when you get into the big part of the book. It's like 800 pages or something like that. And he goes down the Asian paths and the Eastern paths. But you get these maps. And so then you have, in Plato's time, you have Socrates here and Plato, and then you have another group over here and another group over here. And they're all debating. And you got people around them, you know, they're writing books. You got a sustained dialogue. And in the midst of that dialogue, eventually the issues become clear. And the one who's sitting on really solid answers wins. And then what happens is some papers are written, and then eventually new disciplines emerge and new universities emerge. That happens on Eastern paths and Western paths.
Which happened in Aristotle, because Aristotle was the first one. Remember, you've got Socrates, took the hemlock, but his student was Plato. Plato then wrote stuff down, which is where we get Socrates' dialogues from. And then you have Socrates, who taught Aristotle. Aristotle was the first one to actually start a university. And actually, the beginning of the decline.
So you're spanning several hundred years in that kind of a swing.
But understand what we're saying here, everyone, is it's one conversation. In this. Yeah. From a macro standpoint of what the Spirit of God is doing, they call it, in the study of a philosophy, they call it, as paradigms emerge, it's a single conversation. So you have to think that you have to get into your mind a little bit like, how is God looking down at this conversation? He's spurring it up here, he's spurring it up there, he's spurring it up here, he's spurring it up there. And we're collectively, over periods of decades, we're having a conversation about getting back to his truth and how it might look for us to live in that way. That's what we're doing. And keep in mind, Aristotle was then, who was a student of his, was Alexander the Great. What did Alexander the Great do? Conquered a whole bunch of territory so that everyone, and he demanded all of them speak Koine Greek. I
thought you were excited about paradigm curves.
Well, I mean, I just got excited in the last week.
Well, think about the dialogues that are going on. You got TE over here. You got
and then
church-based
Jesus came.
here.
I didn't finish my point. Jesus came at the end of that era.
I was doing a joke so that you would finish your point and I could get to my point.
You should have waited 10 more seconds and then I could have finished my point. All right, what were you saying?
I don't remember.
Oh.
No, you can start mapping this. Remember when you said you actually want to start a mapping process to illustrate not only our story but the influences around the outside.
Yeah.
And then but then the other conversations that are out there. When you look at these pages, it's just absolutely incredible. You can see everything that's going on, in the debate by mapping them. Because think now, I mean, we got church-based and because the seminaries are fragmented and they're going to completely go away, but something new is going to come up.
Walter Kaiser said in the interview, he said 27 seminaries and Bible seminaries shut down in 2023. What year is it? 2024. It's 2023. 27 across the United States shut down this year because they don't have enough students. And the only way to fund in that paradigm is students. The students have to pay.
And even those of you who've been around for a long time remember Ted Ward predicting that by 2025, they would be almost completely going out of business. Even Trinity and Gordon Conwell are jettisoning stuff all over the place, at this stage. Yeah. So the paradigm has shifted. But being able to see the conversation is so important, and recognize that, and basically while you were bringing that up, everything that you're involved with as tools have been produced through dialogue, have been produced locally, have been interacted with many of you as they come out internationally. We use hundreds of authors in the process, but you've got to steward that paradigm core, because there's only a few things on that first dot. I hadn't thought of the critical mass thing quite like that either. I thought it was later. But when you go to that, you know, the first dot, a lot of things are in place in that first dot, but a lot of work to drive it up the curve to the second dot and to the third dot. And that the chart you have at the beginning, where you start with macro and meso, I think, and micro, is exactly what happens. But the job of a paradigm shifter in that kind of model is you hang on to that big dot at the beginning. So as lots of people are dialoguing and helping solve the problems, you got to hang on to that big dot.
Yeah, and hanging on
And
to that.
that's what the paradigm papers are, that's what the encyclicals are, what the white papers are, and what your global dialogues are.
Well,
His global dialogues coming out of the paradigm papers are, how do you make sure when you're scaling it, you're hanging on to that core that's there. Getting it clear, but hanging on to it.
Yeah, and hanging on to it, Jeff, but we have to end now, but hanging on to it, I didn't include this in the paper. I've got another couple pages we may add to it in time, but what it's about is, if you read about the leaders in the communities who start these, you know what they're typically labeled as? I'm talking about across time. You read the one that came out for 500 years of the Reformation, that Rex Metaxas book, who's celebrating the 500 years. They're labeled as argumentative people, actually.
Labeled what?
Argumentative, because they're protecting they're protecting a dot. They're protecting a set of patterns.
I always have considered that a virtue.
Of a virtue, right? But that's what happens in these beginnings of these paradigms, because you're fighting against, again, it's not against people, but it's against a set of patterns by which people view the world, which you feel is incommensurate, is not accurate to what the patterns are that Christ and his apostles taught.
I hear all the time the idea that you were really argumentative in the paradigm papers, but then you matured and you're a lot nicer in the encyclicals. I hear that all the time, that this explains it. You got to really go after the issues at the beginning. I really didn't get nicer. I can give you some later illustrations to prove that point. But
the point is I hope what you've been able to see, at least from a view, is that this paradigm that God has asked us all collectively to be a part of, it's important that we can recognize what's happened in the past and use these to help us shed light on what the future is. I will tell you for myself, I tend to listen to, I'm in a lot of different situations, I'll hear problems. That's what we leaders do. We solve problems. Leaders solve problems. But you hear the problems, and in my mind, I'm putting that dot on these curves all the time. When I was sitting with all of you in the last 10 days, I'm putting everything you're saying, in a sense, on a dot, on the curve. Some of you are like, in the conversations with you, I don't know, I don't want to be a dot on a curve. I just want to go do something else. That's a different thing. But okay, that's the first session. We're going to take a break because we don't have time for questions. I apologize about that. This was a quick one, but we can maybe take those questions after the break. However, during break, we do need, before I dismiss you, I need to have about 20 of you come up here. I need to tell you and get you prepared for something. So, Antone, if you could come up here, Byra, Ebby, Felix, Femi, Holger, Javier, Jean-Claude, Josephat, Keith, Rakesh, Luke, Thompson, M.M., Matthews, Chadwick, Philip, you don't have to come up, and Jean-Claude, you don't have to come up because I've already talked to you. Ray, Finnegan, that's it. If you guys would come up right now, that would be appreciated. Okay, the rest of you are dismissed for a break. We'll see you in 15 minutes.